So the combat update is here in the live game. It is EoC 2.0. Now a lot has changed and I am still learning this just as everyone else is, figuring out rotations, how to do abilities and whatnot. But I wanted to put together a quick video covering the combat triangle and just some of my initial things that I've been doing, some initial rotations, just for some of you to maybe pull a little bit of information of if you're really struggling with this. Hopefully some of these rotations can help, or some of these ideas can help. So without any further delay, let's go ahead and get right into this video. Now I know this preset looks like pure chaos, just kind of ignore it for the time being. I just have a bunch of stuff in there from testing and whatnot, but I think we should definitely start with what I think is the simplest combat style to learn, and that is melee. Melee has had most of its ability book very much condensed, and now as you can see they've actually labeled the different abilities like basic, enhanced, ultimate, and utility, but this style has probably had the most number of abilities cut from it, and the basic big picture ideas are still pretty much the same. You do a berserk rotation, you do some filler in between until Zerk comes back off cooldown, and then you go for another Zerk rotation if you're just camping this style. And an interesting they changed about berserk is it now only deals 1.75x, but you also only take an increase of 25% damage, whereas before it was 2x damage dealt, but an increased damage taken by 50%. And now that sounds like a huge nerf, but what they ended up doing was lifting all of the base ability damage values up across the entire combat style. So it's as simple as 5 plus 5 is 10, and also 6 plus 4 is 10. Yes, the numbers are now different, but they all add up to the same result. And something they added into Berserk as well is similar to Necromancy, Overpower. Like Death Skulls has a massive cooldown reduction, so now you can get a bunch of overpowers off in Berserk. I won't rant about my thoughts on these changes in this video. This is just giving the information to get it out there. And the ability that has direct effects on Berserk is Greater Flurry still. Before, Greater Flurry reduced your Berserk cooldown, but now what it does is increases your Zerk duration. So essentially, if you press Greater Flurry inside of a Berserk, it'll pretty much just freeze the timer where it is, giving you a free ability. And it still works if you bleed the ability, so it will pause the Zerk timer and then you can go use other abilities while that bleed is going on the target, which the reason they did this is so that Berserk and Meteor Strike pretty much just line up all the time and you can make a very consistent rotation, whereas before, if you were doing a prolonged fight with melee, your Berserk cooldown would not be in line with other cooldowns that you had. And speaking of Meteor Strike, this ability has also changed quite a lot. Instead of working on the same crit adrenaline buff meta that Tsunami works on still, or like it did before the update, and same with Incendiary Shot, how it used to do this, it now just gives you a flat amount of adrenaline per game tick, and your basic abilities act kind of like if they're under the Natural Instinct effect, except instead of 2 times adrenaline gain, it's 1.5x. And in practice, this gives you a lot of adrenaline to play with inside of your Zerk rotation. However, with how all the cooldowns currently work out, there is not a lot of variance, so to speak, with this. With Flurry being so powerful in extending the Zerk timer, and with Overpower being the same exact damage, but now you get 3 or even potentially 4 of them inside of a Berserk, although I believe you still miss it out on the 4th Overpower by 1 game tick, just doing the rough math in my head. But you are very much pigeonholed into always pressing these 3 Overpowers and 2 Greater Flurries, and with Assault having such a short cooldown now, it's kind of just a press these 3 buttons and win, so to speak. However, I still find myself adding in a Dagger EOF once in a while. I may add in 1 or 2, so there is a slight amount of variance, but this is mostly because I haven't fully figured out like the optimal 100% perfect Zerk rotation yet. I'm sure the spreadsheet wizards are working day and night, or they've already calculated this by now. Also, with melee not being too focused on critical strikes anymore, critical strikes are still really nice and give a lot of damage because of how that whole system works, but you can very much much now get away with using a Scripture of Full and a Ripper Demon. If you still want to run Grim and Calg, go for it, but you can very much do the Scripture and Ripper Demon setup. In fact, I would probably just run the Ripper Demon all the time unless you need a Hellhound for defense. But that example would look like this. So just before I Zerk, I usually go ahead and hit a Meteor Strike and then anticipate, Zerk with an APOT, and then I'll Barge, bleed the Flurry, hit Overpower, and then go for an Assault. Let that build up a little bit. Maybe go for a Dagger EOF and then go for a G Fury into an Overpower, and then maybe Chaos Roar and Easy K. It is better to Chaos Roar a Dagger spec. I'll hit another Dagger here. Maybe a 2-hit Assault. Maybe a basic here and then hit another Flurry. Will that fully play out? Another ability and then hit our last Overpower and maybe a Hurricane to finish it off. And that's pretty much a Zerk rotation. After this, you would want to go into a ZGS spec. If you have one, if you don't, it's not the end of the world, but they're pretty cheap and you could just buy a physical one. You don't need to EOF it. If you've watched any of my previous videos, I talked about how it's kind of ridiculous to EOF a ZGS, but technically it's a thing. I won't go over that here. Just use the physical one and you'll be just fine. And honestly, for your ZGS spec, Assault's probably going to be your best friend, but you'll probably want to just do basics in order to build up a Dren. If you want to toss some bleeds out during that, go ahead. But I think we will move on to the next combat style. Now, the next combat style we're going to talk about is the ranged combat style. Now, range, just like melee, is not reliant on crit chance in order to gain a bunch of adrenaline anymore. So you can still use something like Scripture of Full and a Ripper Demon, and your rotation will look pretty much exactly the same as it would with a Grimoire and a Calg Demon. And for initial testing of the style, I went to Raksha. It took me about an hour to really kind of nail down what I was doing, and I was able to do the Grandmaster requirement with range at Raksha. I did a 14.4. Some people I've talked have been able to do 110.8s, and there's honestly not a whole lot of changes with this style. Death Swiftness still operates the same, and it's the same big picture idea of you do a DS and then you do some in-between stuff and you build up for another DS, kind of rinse and repeat. You still want to go for 2 rapid fires because the Dracolich buff is still very strong, and I was still using most of the EOFs that I have. SGB, ECB, Zebo, and Darkbow I have still found uses for so far, as I'm able to plug them into the rotations just as I have in the past. Although I'm sure now that the style has changed, people will actually go ahead and write some rotations that include Gloomfire Bow, but we'll just have to wait and see. Imbue Shadows has replaced Incendiary Shot, and it doesn't do a hit like Incendiary Shot did, but how it works is every single hit splat you do generates 5% adrenaline, and so this gives you the feel of how range used to work in practice and allows you to still get off a pretty doggone good rotation. They added an ability called Gale Shot, and you can think of this ability as a single hit ability that applies something like Frostblades to yourself, or maybe think of it as like someone activating the Ghost spec from Necromancy, where it is just giving you an additional damage on each of your hit splats for the next 6 seconds. And the way I've been using this is I just press this ability before I press Rapid Fire, because Rapid Fire is a low damaging ability per hit, but it does a lot of hits. So with abilities that function in the same way, that is the ones you want to use within the time window that Gale Shot provides. Another ability that has changed but actually really benefits from the Gale Shot ability is Dead Shot. Now, Dead Shot on its own feels kind of weak, but when you have the Gale Shot buff, you have done a Rapid Fire and you're getting the crit buff and ECB active with how it calculates and whatnot, Dead Shot becomes a very strong ability when you kind of align the stars for it. And essentially it just fires out 8 hits in a single global cooldown. And you can throw this in any part of your ranged rotation because it is 8 hits. So it will put you exactly on the same number of bulk stacks as you were before you pressed it. Also, Snipe has some good functionality. It's a 3 tick instead of 4 tick, and it has a really long cooldown, but it does a lot of damage, and Piercing Shot happens to help reduce that cooldown, but I wouldn't recommend falling into the trap of spamming piercing shots just to get a bunch of more snipes. If you hit them in your rotation to help align bulk stacks for other things, then it's just a nice benefit, but this is not something that is a super high priority. And the only other change I can think of is I just put the basic where my dazing shot used to sit, and I don't really press it too often, but it is there. I kind of treat it the same way. And the only other changes I can think of for just helping you guys understand what's going on is corrupt shot now kind of acts like a Gricko, but applies a damage over time, and it costs 20% adrenaline. I really haven't found a use for this in any rotation. It's very much an AoE focused ability, so try not to press it. I've had to break my muscle memory of pressing this ability, but it is what it is. And Shadow Tendrils works pretty much the same as it did before, but it buffs the duration of your imbue shadows by 3.6 seconds. So this ability is very important to press before your imbue shadows goes away, because that extra duration is very helpful when doing a DS rotation. Now, the last thing I need to talk about is the arrow side. There were actually some decent arrow changes in the update. Death Spores now no longer require a critical strike in order to gain a stack. It is just count the number of hits and go, but they increased the count requirement from 5 to 12. You hit a piercing shot, do a greater ricochet, and another piercing shot, and then you have all your stacks. Because of how bulk works, it'll give you the extra one you need. And then I've just been using that to get a free death swiftness. The other arrows that got a change were the when arrows, and you're not able to consume when arrows before they hit their maximum stacks now, but it's only a 10 stack requirement to get the effect. They still only buff thresholds and special attacks, but they lowered the damage on when arrows from 30 to 25%, so the classic when nerf has struck again. And honestly, at 25%, I really haven't, I was using them on release, but I ended up just like full arrow camping quite a lot of things, and it seems to be doing pretty well damage wise. If I go quickly here into the beasts tab and I pull up Nakatra, I did manage to get the Grandmaster timer. Now, granted, I did use a range melee setup, kind of this one right here, except I had a Karis, but Death Swiftness with full arrows was able to chunk all of the damage I really needed it to, and then I just did a Zerk to kind of clear out the last bit of HP on Naka and take care of the dogs, and then I just used a Death Swiftness on phase 4, and I got back-to-back Grandmaster timers, which, for context, Nakatra is definitely my weakest speed killing boss ever. I was really bad at Raksha for the longest time because I very much struggled with the phase timing and having hits get nulled for no reason. But for some reason, when it comes to speed killing at Sanctum of Rebirth, I'm even worse there. So for me to just waltz my way in with a range melee hybrid setup and just pull a back-to-back Grandmaster timer directly out of my butt while only using full arrows for a majority of the fight, I think that's pretty decent in terms of damage output. Now, it's not really going to hold a candle to what melee and even magic is doing right now, but I find range fun as a combat style to use, so I'll probably still use it, although that's kind of my inner hipster speaking from yesteryear. Now, when I go into a boss instance, I will usually grab stacks on this dummy right here, or if the boss allows me to drop a combat dummy, I'll build up 11 stacks on Death Spore, so that way I can just run in and hit like a basic, get my free Death Spore proc. Or if it allows me to drop a combat dummy, I will just go ahead and get the Death Spore proc and then like surge in where I need to and drop my DS immediately. And for this example, I'm just going to be wearing full arrows the whole time, so there isn't going to be any fancy arrow switching. But we'll go ahead and start off. We'll go ahead and get our Death Spore stacks. I'll go ahead and piercing shot, Gricko into a piercing shot, and then hit Death Swiftness, imbue shadows, go for an ECB spec, and then go ahead and hit Gale Shot into a rapid fire. And here I'll hit a bulk spec into a dead shot, and then a dark bow, and then another dark bow. I'll go ahead and Gricko into a tendrils, maybe a snapshot into another ECB. Go ahead and go for a Gale Shot and get my second rapid out. Then go for a snipe, be a dark bow, into a snapshot, into another Gricko. And then just go on from there and kind of improv what I need to do. But that is kind of just a preliminary death swiftness rotation that I've been using that puts out a decent amount of damage. And I do save the APOT for slightly later, so that way I can get out 2 dark bow specs and have those go out after the dead shot. And all of that is under the rapid fire passive. And since I'm not building when arrow stacks, I can just use Gricko as an adren gainer rather than using it to try and build stacks and focus on things that way. And I believe the adrenaline would also allow me to use a Zamibo spec or a Zamibo EOF instead of snapshot, but I've just been pressing snapshot because it's simple and it's right there. Snapshot is a 135 to 155% ability damage. Snapshot does 135% to 155% range damage. For 25%, Zamibo does 160 to 180%, but it costs 40% adrenaline, although vigor works on EOF specs, so it is technically less. Like if I go ahead and press it here, I ended at 7.5 instead of 3.5 like I should have. So Zamibo is still worthwhile to press if you have the adrenaline over snapshot. So I will leave that up to y'all to kind of improv and play with on your own journey, and leave it in the comments below on what you've been doing so far. But before I ramble on any longer, we need to go ahead and talk about the last combat style, and that is magic. Alrighty, so I have a preset that happens to have magic in it. Ignore the rest of this. This is just my kind of testing preset for doing Glacor. But the key changes for magic, I'll just kind of rapid fire some of these real quick. Combust still works the same, but it no longer has its movement thing. It is just a flat damage every single time, and it still generates adrenaline. Corrupt Blast and Magma Tempest still cost adrenaline. Again, I'm not gonna ramble on my thoughts on what is good and what isn't with this update. I'm just telling you as it is. But these both cost 20% adrenaline and are definitely focused on doing AoE damage. You don't want to be pressing these inside of a sunshine rotation. Tsunami is still a copy paste of old, same with Greater Sunshine and Omni Power. But Wild Magic is now a 5.4 second cooldown instead of 20, so that's kind of like your I don't know what to do, I'm just gonna press Wild Magic because it's still good damage. It's fine to press in a sunshine rotation. You don't want to hyper fixate prioritize Wild Magic, but it's not bad to press. If you're on the best in slot setup like me, then you will definitely want to go for 2 Asphyxiates in Sun. But the main ability that got quite the change was Greater Sonic Wave, where essentially you use it, it's a decent hit, and it saves you adrenaline on your next ability. And it works really well with this new ability that got added, Runic Charge, where it essentially just turbos whatever ability you press next with it, although it's only for 3 abilities. Don't get confused and think that you can Runic Charge and then get a turboed Omni Power or something like that. But if you Runic Charge before you hit a G Sonic, the next ability will cost significantly less adrenaline, and that works for Sunshine. So now whenever you start a Sunshine rotation, you want to hit Runic Charge with your Greater Sonic Wave and then press your Sunshine key. And it has a 30-second cooldown, but it will work out to where you can press this again at the tail end of your Sunshine, and maybe use it with something like your G-Conk, or if there's some minions around, or you just want to get some adrenaline, move into something else, you can use it with Dragon Breath for just a single hit. I like this at Glacor for the minions because the Big D Breath, if I'm just coming off of Sun, it's really nice for the set of 4, but I digress. And the way this ability actually works is it's cast off global cooldown. It doesn't incur global cooldown. You just press it and it insta-procs. So just as you were to key roll and combo eat food, you can think of the speed in which you press for brew and jellyfish, or jellyfish brew technically, but the same speed you're pressing the buttons to combo eat, you would do the same thing for Runic Charge and whichever ability you want to be affected by it. Just make sure in your order of operations, meaning the order you press your 2 keybinds, that you press Runic first and not your ability first. Also, one more note I should make is that spells no longer auto attack. That is what the basic is for. It just fires off a single hit ability, and it basically just mimics the effect of whatever you have selected. So right now I have Insight Fear selected, so every auto attack here will just give me a Insight Fear stack, or if I swap over to Blood Barrage, I just start spamming Blood Barrage while spamming the same key, or if I even move to Ice Barrage, Then it's just putting out a bunch of ice autos, so on and so forth. Now you still want to use Insight Fear and get it to 5 stacks in order to save the adrenaline on Tsunami. I'm surprised they didn't decouple these, but it is what it is. Right now you still need to get 5 stacks of Insight Fear in order to get the full adren save on Tsunami. Now unlike melee and range combat, with magic you definitely want to be using a Grim, and you definitely want to have a Calgurian Demon, because just as before, magic is focused purely on critical strike chance, and so you want to bring all of the items that maximize it. I know people will still argue on whether Reavers or Channelers is better. I just have Reavers because it's nice in this hybrid setup. It works well for melee, it works well for mage, so it just makes my life a lot easier. Just use whichever ring you want or whichever makes you feel better about yourself. Just use that one. But we'll go ahead and do an example magic rotation. So I will runic charge my Sonic Wave, and then go ahead and hit Sunshine into a G-Conk, Nami into an FSOA spec, and then instantly into an Asphyx. And then here I'm just going to G-Conk and hit an Omni Power into a Wild Magic, maybe hit a Tendrils, maybe use a quick EOF spec here into another G-Conk, another EOF spec, and then go ahead and hit my second Asphyx. And then here I'm going to runic my G-Conk, maybe go for a Wild Magic, into another D-Breath, and that's pretty much it for a Sun rotation. Other than using the runic charge on Sonic Wave to get the adren for Sunshine, Sun feels pretty much the same to me. Myself and a friend of mine kind of simplified this and started calling it ronicking your Sun. It's kind of silly, but it's a fun inside joke, so it is what it is. And that's all I've really done in the combat beta so far. Again, these are just temporary rotations to kind of give you a starting point to work with, or if you already have something that you have built up, just an insight to what buttons I have been pressing. And again, just as with all my videos, you are free to pull as little or as much information as you want in them. And that's all I really have to say about that.